Good afternoon and welcome to China Africa Conference at the LSE 2021. Today, we are extremely honored to be delivering a panel on delivering the promise of Africa's youth with China. We have some distinguished speakers with us on this panel. First of all, Ruth Kagia, Deputy Chief of Staff to the President of Kenya, Siddharth Chatterjee, UN Resident Coordinator for the United Nations, UN Resident Coordinator in China, Professor Haifang Liu, Director of Center for African Studies at China's Peking University. My name is Shirley. So today we will be talking about some fundamental game changers to the future of Africa's dynamics that is brought by China's various educational initiatives across the region. So first of all, Haifang, since you are right at Peking University based in Beijing, under China's China Africa FOCAC initiative, China has in the recent years formally institutionalized the educational initiatives for African students in China. Would you mind giving us a sense of the Chinese government initiatives there?
Thank you, Shirley, for the question and then for the opportunity to join this panel. I am indeed, as an educator, heavily involved for this kind of educating African youth, and not only our own students, but also widely international students lately. But also myself have been just doing a research, particularly about China's policy to support African students to come to study in China. So I am confident to say that I do know a little bit about the issue you just raised. In terms of institutional mechanism, are currently we have a Chinese Ministry of Education is coordinating with the Ministry of Finance and then also several other organizations to set up a very solid support for African youth to be educated in China. So currently we also have scholarship of a Chinese Scholarship of Council, yes, Chinese Scholarship Council, that's the full name, CSC, as one of the funding organizations is really specifically focused on all the international students coming to be supported by Chinese government. And at the same time, there are also some program which started from municipal government or provincial government. And then this type of a scholarship cover about 20%. And you also have about 10% of in total for scholarship coming from university or college levels. Yeah, so this is the rough picture for supporting African students to come to study in China. And in terms of, maybe just another information for the management levels in the university, we actually in whole Chinese, we have nearly 300 universities now is accepting students, and African students definitely one of the very important part, hold about 1/3 in total. And then in each university there are also a specific office called the International Students Office is in charge of all this students affair.
Right, so it does seem like there is a whole of government and whole of state approach in treating the future educational opportunities for African students in China. But can you give us also the scale of that Chinese scholarships that you were talking about? I understood that somewhere around 2020, China was given as many as 80,000 scholarships to African students to study in China. That's quite massive. What's the state right now?
I think there are lots of information not necessarily accurate. The number you were just talking about, 80,000, actually cover both funded, governmental funded students, but also those self-funded students. In total, actually, I just mentioned the government CSC, Chinese Scholarship Council. We also have government and then also university levels finance. So in total, this three parts, we only have 12.8% in total are financed by Chinese in any way. And then the rest, which means nearly 88% coming by their own, financed by themselves. So it's a very, specifically the number such as 2019 before the COVID, we actually saw the number which is 66,000 financed by government, and then the rest there are in total I'm talking about the total number, including both this 66,000 are numbers financed from everywhere, from Asia, from even some European, some American university students are financed by this CSC scholarship. And then for African students, there are also the similar proportion, only 12%. And then all the rest are self-financed. I hope I'm clear.
Just a quick question. Is this per year or every 3 years?
This is a kind of you of course have accumulative. Some students it works for 3 years, some works for 4 years. So it depends on the program. And then this is
what I mean is, when you say 66,000 or 80,000, are you saying new intake of 80,000?
No, the way out. Can you hear me, Ruth? I think some between you and me, there are someone, the signal is not strong. Can you hear me?
We can cut it out, so we can just continue.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm saying this number, the statistic method is accumulative. So they are just calculating each year. They need to support the first grade or second grade. So in total, this is the year they are supporting. So nearly 60,000. Otherwise, there is no another kind of a method to statistic each year. But there is definitely very, as Shirley just mentioned, a very fast increased scale, like 2018 when China African Summit held. President Xi Jinping announced 80,000 for 3 years only for African students. What number I just mentioned was for everyone, covered the whole world.
Right. So following up on Ruth's question, is there a difference in terms of the scholarship treatment to Anglophile versus Francophile African students?
No, I don't think so. It's really upon the request from African countries. So each year they nominate or they use public test, both Chinese officials who are sitting within the government as educationalists, expert, and then there are also African Ministry of Education. They will join together to do this exam. So it's really about who can be qualified to come to study.
So Ruth, you are over there overseeing one of the most dynamic and one of the most important African economies, Kenya. And you did mention, and you have very strong convictions that China has reaped a demographic dividend over the past 4 decades of reform and opening up journey, and that China can today help Africa also reap the demographic dividend. But how so?
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you for inviting me to this very important meeting. Before I respond to your question, I want to say that the timing of this program that you are introducing at LSE is perfect. In history, that's going to shape dynamics, not just in China and Africa, but globally. And every country in one way or another is reviewing its development strategy to make sure that they adjust effectively to the new post-COVID normal. So the timing is perfect. And even more so because there's a convergence of three important factors. One is just how relationships and engagements are going to be realigned post-COVID. Secondly, it is the critical role of China in Africa, which has become one of the most important and most strategic roles that the continent is engaged in. And then obviously, the huge potential of the continent. When you put those three together, you essentially have a powerful program that you could develop that begins to define the way forward, not just for purposes of LSE, but in terms of sort of reshaping the development and cooperation agenda going forward. And that is the context in which I want to premise my remarks. And basically say that, in a very short time, 20 years essentially since FOCAC was established, China has defined a central role in the continent, recognized more so by the infrastructure gaps that it has helped to close, which was one of the critical constraints to development, and that has been very important in its own right. The role of training and skill development and human development by China in Africa is less muted, and it could be sharpened further. The numbers may be large, but what I would like to propose is there's a lot of scope to realign that in order to realize a similar demographic dividend. When you look at how China was able to basically transform its economy in one generation, an underlying reason was the quality of human capital, the very fast ramping up of the skills and the education of its people. We need a similar process in Africa. And whereas African youth are much better educated than 20 years ago, there are still a lot of gaps in quality, in equity, and more importantly, in terms of sort of 25. So improving the quality with a focus on soft skills, 21st skills, digital skills becomes important. So one of the things I would like to propose to you, Professor Haifang, is as we look at 80,000 or so people that are being trained, look a little bit more closely at the quality, at the content of that training to align it to 21st century skills. So that's one. The second is in terms of release the graphic dividend, and again, China did this very well, is how you linked growing human development skills, labor market, and for work. So how we enable young people in Africa to access job opportunities, to me, a critical entry point is technology, because technology will enable our constraints of infrastructure in terms of school infrastructure, constraints of technical capacity in terms of not very strongly trained teachers. Technology will help to close those gaps very quickly. Secondly, it closes the gap as we are doing this morning. We are talking to you from across the world. And that is now, as we saw during COVID, being translated into the classroom, into health, into e-commerce, and so on and so forth. So realigning the training programs to basically enlarge the space for African youth as we offer this. And then finally, what COVID has done, generating wealth, basically, and information, in this case, data and technology, that has been shifted quite fundamentally. So we need to align our education and training system in terms of how those movements are being reshaped. So what I'm saying is the training China is offering is immense, but we could use this opportunity, this inflection point of COVID, to align it to the emerging opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Africa certainly has the abundance of young, amazing labor force on the horizon, and with China's infusion of that digital economic experience into Africa, and hopefully Kenya will be in an amazing place to be able to assist and shape Africa's educational dynamics as well. We'll come back to you on the digital space. And Sid, you have been sitting quietly there listening to the two ladies, but I remember that you co-authored an article with the former president of Ghana, John Mahana, on Africa's youth promise or peril. You did talk about the both sides. So what is the promise and what is the peril there?
Thank you, Shirley. And for me, it's truly an honor to join you. And of course, my dear friend, Ruth Kagia, as well as Professor Yu. Really lovely to meet her today.
I can't hear you, Sid.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
Yeah, okay. So I was saying, let me repeat. So first of all, a real honor to join Ruth Kagia and Professor Yu and you, Shirley, today at today's event. Let me start with a quote from President Xi Jinping when he said that the nation will be full of hope and have a great tomorrow when its younger generations have ideals, ability, and a strong sense of responsibility. So let's look at the East Asian economies. And this, I want to kind of bring it back to the article that I co-authored with President Mahama, which was called Promise or Peril, Africa's 900 million young people by 2050. That is the number that we are looking at an African continent, which will be at about 2.5 billion by 2050. But if you look at the East Asian economies, let's look specifically at Korea and China that have experienced a significant youth population in the 60s and 70s. Both countries thereafter embarked on a remarkable growth trajectory, and their economic growth became from middle to a higher income levels in a very short time. And the lessons of the Chinese miracle indicate that there were four major investments that they made. They made an investment in education and skills. They made an investment in empowerment and making sure that women were freed up to join the labor force. And therefore, when Chen Mao talks about women hold up half the sky, is very true as it resonates in China. Just a statistic here. Of the 80 women who are billionaires all over the world, 2/3 are Chinese. This is very significant of a nation state that has actually allowed the full realization of a woman's potential. The third E is employment, and having employment is the key. And the fourth is equity, which is the principle of leaving no one behind. I believe the 14th five-year plan is a reflection of that. Now, African governments, Shirley and colleagues, spend about 5% of GDP on education, which is perhaps second highest in the region. However, the efficiency of the spending is low, and the region currently faces an annual $40 billion gap in education finance. Now, a recent report by the African Development Bank also provides recommendations on how governments can improve education and spending efficiency and mobilize additional resources. But I see a huge opportunity for China and Africa to collaborate in the space of education and skills building. It is not just about African students coming to China to be trained and to be educated, but what about Chinese institutions coming into different parts of Africa, not only going through the normative education system of the bachelor's and master's degree, but more importantly, is to address the phenomenal skills gap that we have amongst the African youth. Rapid urbanization is associated also with a young potential workforce migrating in search of jobs can change the landscape of human settlement, and these could pose significant challenges for living and health conditions, education levels, and the environment. An ILO study said an overwhelming majority of African youth aged between 15 to 24 are informally employed with no or little education, are rural-based, and mainly engaged in subsistence agriculture. Yet, as Ruth talked about the digital revolution, there are more than 400 tech hubs that have sprung up across the continent. Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town are emerging as internationally recognized technological centers. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated digitalization absolutely in the workplace, sharpening the need for technical and vocational skills aligned with Africa's development and the need for a youthful population focused on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Here is again a place for congruence between China and Africa. And I know not just OPEC, but there is a very deliberate push by China to make sure that Africa becomes what it wants to be in terms of the Africa Free Trade Area, in terms of the success of the Africa Union 2063 agenda. Let me make one quote from President Uhuru Kenyatta, who said back in 2015, 2016, he said youth unemployment is an existentialist threat. And he's absolutely right. Now, if African leaders can actually invest in those 4 E's of education, skills, empowerment, employment, and equity, we can change the game. And Shirley, let me just conclude by saying that what China achieved in 40 years of going from abject poverty of a per capita GDP of $180 to that of around $12,000 per capita today, and is likely to touch $25,000 per capita by 2025, was because it made those investments in those education, in those skills, in the empowerment, in the employment. And I believe that now is the time to turn, as I say, the demographic dividend into a real dividend, and it will be reaped when we make those investments. And I see an ideal partnership here between African governments, the United Nations system, as well as the Chinese government. And here is where we can see an ideal nexus of what the UN Secretary General calls upon all of us, of bridging the South-South divide, of bridging the South-North divide, and allowing more South-South cooperation, more South-South learning, more South-South partnerships to take. Over to you. Thank you.
Sid, it's very interesting. You talked about African governments in general have been investing 5% of GDP into education. However, it's not efficient. How do you measure efficiency of that education? Are you saying that basically the input of educational resources are not being used to produce the right sort of talents in Africa today?
Okay, so let's take, for example, the issue is the education matching the economy and the future economy. So while we are investing in a lot of the traditional education system, which is also part of a colonial past, Shirley, and it is informed by that. But we do have an opportunity, for example, of investing more in the kind of skills that is needed. Today, if you plumbers, masons, carpenters, welders, those skill sets that are necessary for nation building in the space of BRI, which is very, very important in Africa, because without the Belt and Road Initiative, without the digital and physical infrastructure, we will have no Africa Free Trade Area. Very important. But the labor force that needs to accompany this sort of infrastructure development needs to be skilled up. So that is where I see ideal collaboration between the private sector, state-owned enterprises, the public sector, governments coming together. Because for Africa, the #1 priority has to be its youthful population. Over 70% of the population is less than 30. As I said, 900 million people, young people, will be there by 2050. Every 24 hours, 35,000 African young people are looking for work in the age group of 15 to 30. And that translates to about 12 million a year. Imagine. Now, if you were talking about the peril, imagine if these people were to get onto boats and head to Lampedusa and get to Europe. There is no way the combination of the European Coast Guard, Air Force, Army, Navy can stop that new insertion. However, we could turn this around because the future economic growth The velocity will be in Africa because the rest of the world is aging. China, Japan, all of the Asian tigers, Europe, all of them are aging. I mean, I'll give you another statistic here. The median age of Kenya, for example, is 18. The median age of Sweden is 47. So you can see how that chasm is there, but the future of consumption and production is going to be in Africa. So it is actually, I would call upon to China to invest much more in the African continent, because I believe the return of investment will be there in the future years. Over to you.
Very interesting. Ruth, you earlier talked about the digital transformation that China has been trying to bring to the African economies. And I think Sid is alluding also to something similar, which is using the digital technologies to collaborate across continents on the various educational platforms. So China has been supporting Africa with the adoption of the digital technologies, and in countries such as Kenya, we do see some transformations in that space. So could you give us some on-the-ground experience of China's actual plans and strategies, training strategies there?
Thank you. Thank you. China has made a lot of contribution to the digital footprint in Africa. I believe Huawei provides about 10% of the basic connectivity in the continent. So it's a predominant force. I think it's more a question of aligning that force to the felt needs of the young people in the continent, so that it's not simply an importation of technology, it is also, in this case, to be able to innovate through positives, which are sort of evident. 2 weeks ago, we visited a hospital in a rural part of Kenya that is doing telemedicine, connecting to the biggest national hospital and enabling doctors to do complicated diagnosis and surgery. That is the way forward. And the technology platform they were using was provided by Huawei. So that there's no doubt, China is a major contributor to this. Would like to take that further forward to make sure that the digital infrastructure is expanded to many more places. It's not just one hospital there, one school there, but expand the technological infrastructure to supporting in the development of skills, digital skills. We have an ongoing digital education program, but it has been slow to become universalized. The devices, for example, because of teacher training. So making sure that the total ecosystem, digital ecosystem, from the hardware to the software is sort of fully made available. At the moment, there are a lot of gaps in that ecosystem. So the request here is to advance that very strong technology footprint in Africa into strengthening the total ecosystem.
Right. So interestingly, Africa, because Africa's development experience sort of started later. This was from a conversation I just had with the Vice President of the World Bank, Jing Dong, and he said, well, you have to remember in the 1990s, Africa just came out of regional wars and conflicts and unfortunately genocide. And so that development experience just started to kick off in the late 90s, and things have been actually happening very fast, given Africa credits. So now it just seems that when China started to develop in the 1970s, China moved into trade, the low-end jobs, the light industries, and developed industries, primarily in manufacturing. But now Africa is moving fully, jumping in a generation fully into digital space. But Ruth, in all our conversations, essentially with Sid and you, and all what we heard from many aspects in China, Africa, today it seems like the United States is missing from the picture, isn't it? Is the US investing in digital education in Africa at all, or how does it compare to China at the moment?
I actually prefer not to compare countries because Kenya has remained totally non-aligned, and we work with countries on a bilateral basis and recognize and respect and value the bilateral relationship. So I would rather not focus on the comparisons because they contribute different aspects.
So coming back to China's contribution in Africa today. So let's say imagine that we have all these African students, official leaders of Africa, who have graduated from China with a formal education back to Kenya. So when they apply for that job opportunity in Kenya, how competitive are they in the marketplace in comparison to African students, say, who have gotten an LSE degree from the UK or from Harvard, say, for example?
That's a complicated comparison to make because you'll find, for example, a graduate from a US university may be looking for employment in US-based companies here, and you've got lots, the UK alone has about 200 companies in Kenya. So a UK graduate will be most likely be much more competitive in UK-based industries. In a similar way, graduates from Chinese universities, the first port of call is likely to be Chinese context. So it's apples and oranges in a sense. But what I can say for a fact is students who have been trained abroad bring a broader view of the world, whether it is a broader view of West, or they bring a broader view of the world, which makes it easier for them to become more competitive than those who have not trained abroad, because the value of education is how it broadens the mind, it raises the ambition, it releases the innovative creativity, and it almost where that has taken place, as long as it has been quality and it is relevant to the situation on the ground.
Shirley, maybe I could come in and just to reinforce that point. I'm a Princeton University graduate and a very proud graduate of Princeton University. I have interacted with many universities here in China, and I can tell you one thing. At the end of the day, education is the same. The curriculum development is the same, and the kind of work that I see happening in China in the space of artificial intelligence, in the space of quantum computing, in the space of semiconductors, in the space of fintech and biotech, is pretty remarkable. So I really believe that, and today I have people with Chinese degrees, university degrees, working on my team, and they are the best of class. I mean, truly the best of class. So it really is, I go back to what Ruth said, it is about, there is no comparison here. I believe all education systems are by and large the same, and where China has come from to where China is, where you have a large number of international students actually accessing their education system. And so on that count, I would say that they are very much, very much aligned. I wish I was younger. I would have loved to have done another mid-career master's program, perhaps at Peking University or at Tsinghua University, a phenomenal university. And let me tell you what we are trying to do. What we at the United Nations are trying to do, and this is the conversation actually I've had with Ruth and the president of Kenya. We feel that the SDGs that are critical. It's a roadmap. We have a window in front of us, which is known as the Decade of Action, the Sustainable Development Goals. And youth employment relates both to the technical and the vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, entrepreneurship, and for productive employment and decent work. The achievements of, let's say, SDG 4, which is quality education, and SDG 8, which is about decent work and economic growth, is the key for the development of the largest generation of youth in the world, which is in Africa. Now, the governments, therefore, can play a facilitating role in helping forge the private sector, state-owned enterprises, all coming together and bring in the different dynamics. In this context, the UN and China has already started work with several universities in the US, in Africa, in China, to look at an applied research center or a center of excellence, which will consist of pooled intellectuals, leaders from China, US, EU, Africa, to look at the continent and look at what kind of mechanisms, triangular cooperations around policy changes that face Africa, particularly in the space of unemployment and investment in education. So
practical,
immense opportunity.
Practical education. So Haifang, interestingly, Ruth and Sid has been talking about this two-way educational exchange, both for African students in China, but also Chinese universities in Africa. What are Chinese universities doing in Africa today? Do you see a strong push there?
I would say we do have several universities, such as what Mr. said, just say what he wants to be registered to affiliated with our university, and also our neighbor Tsinghua University, and then several will actually set up a fairly new program called African Youth Leadership Program. Not necessarily only for targeting at Africa. Actually, it's just called Global China Program, but it's a focus on leadership training. And for those, I'm sitting as one of the recruit committee members. So each year we actually recruit very excellent elite students globally. We are not following a traditional way like Chinese embassy in each hosting country to work with their ministry. We actually just open the online applications to everyone. Just claim you are a national, for instance, as a Kenyans, you can just apply for that as long as you have a graduate, you have a bachelor degree already, then you can be enrolled if we test you as a qualified one. If you are those kind of personality, have a leadership spirit. So this has been several universities now kind of a new approach to do this kind of a training. For me, we can use the word, as you said, a push, because it's really going everywhere, trying to grab. But I think there is also a very different things between China and a bigger power like US, like UK, because traditionally, since late 50, when China just set up its relationship with all African countries and also Asian country, Latin American country, China never tried to seek for human resource or talents from the world, from other countries. So the goal has been rather serving for making friends and then expanding China's international understandings. So for those kind of a goal, China's policy has been whoever use Chinese scholarship, you have to go back to your own countries to serve your own country. Now the policy is still ongoing, but I think as Mr. said already, pointed out, there are lots of new development, like lots of private sector is joining, and then different kind of a scholarship, for instance, coming from Huawei, from different companies. They are not a governmental scholarship, so there is no this kind of regulation that you have to go back to return to your own country. And now we have seen lots of African talents also working for Chinese companies. And I think another things we also have to pay attention to is also the scale, what you just emphasized, because initially, indeed, if we go back to 1996, before all those previous 40 years, all Chinese, attraction for African students really based on scholarship or Chinese government scholarship. And then only thereafter, and also exactly after that year, we have seen this kind of a self-finance, the students increased heavily. Means in total, China's education now is serving more for a kind of service trade rather than only scholarship attraction. Because if we say the number, we read it clearly, 12% coming with a scholarship, and then all the rest are self-finance. So as Mr. Sid already emphasized, this really means a lot about Chinese education. There is a big practical attraction. They find they have more skill to learn. Specifically, they can work with the Chinese companies, which we already know. I guess, Shirley, you probably also know the statistic made by McKinsey 2 or 3 years ago. There were already 20,000 according to their statistic, but maybe now we have seen more. So how this 80,000 Chinese company, will operate in African continent, obviously, there is a big space for those who got education from China to find their opportunities. So in that way, you can see directly and indirectly things are changing, and then the demand, and then also what China's education, the role it can play is also changing. It's quite a dynamic, quite a diversified.
That's very interesting. So basically, Haifang, what you're saying is, you remember a couple of decades ago when our generation, we went overseas to study, and a lot of the best Chinese actually stayed where they studied and contributed to the local economy. So you're not saying that because of that job opportunity, China is actually allowing international students to stay and work for Chinese next generation of multinationals as well.
I think, yeah. It's a kind of an emerging trend.
Right, it's really interesting. However, I want to go back to my earlier question though. Ruth, from where you are, do you see Chinese university or educational institutions presence widely in Africa within the African continent today? Ruth?
Can you
Do you see, sorry, so from where you are, do you see a wide presence of Chinese universities and educational institutions within the broader African continent today?
Sorry, I have a connection.
Do you, from where, I think you are frozen.
Should I try to answer that, Shirley? And then once Ruth comes on.
I think Ruth is back.
She's back.
Okay.
So Ruth, from where you are, do you see a wide presence of Chinese universities and Chinese educational institutions within the African continent today?
If you compare the presence of China in Africa in infrastructure, every place you see some infrastructure that has been constructed institutions, they are much fewer in relative terms. But quite a few universities have institutes like Confucius Institute here in Nairobi. Some training, a bit of digital training, but it is not much yet. At the moment, a lot of the movement is to China, as opposed to China coming to Africa. And that is what Sid mentioned earlier, we need to see more of.
Interesting. Haifang, are you planning to move there to Africa?
Oh, I will. I'm anxious to be able to work as an educator in Africa. more than that. Actually, yeah, I think Ruth is quite correct in terms of the presence. If you really to compare with the scale of China's infrastructure, we need more that kind of and it's still quite complicated for any university to have a branch abroad. Currently, we only have, our university only have 2 branches. One is in Chicago, the other one is in Cambridge, in UK. So I think these are quite kind of difficult, complicated things to move. But as Ruth also suggests, CI, Confucius Institute, so far in the continent play quite an important role. We have seen some, against or different kind of how to say, I mean, in UK or in US, we have seen those moved to against the Chinese Confucius Institute, but we have done lots of research in different Confucius Institute in Africa. I think largely we can say maybe even every institute in Africa play a very, very important role in terms of provide language training and provide a culture platform for 2 sides to get to know, to really conquer the barrier between the 2 sides. And especially it's the relationship rather happen in the working field. So language and culture is very important. So that's why we emphasize Confucius Institute.
Shirley, I just want to comment. I want to comment with a very particular quote from the United Nations Secretary General, which he said at the 76th session of the General Assembly when he unlocked or unpacked his, the common agenda for the future of humanity. And he says that there are 6 great divides that we must bridge: in peace, in climate, in equality, in gender, in digital, and amongst generations. And he made it clear that young people will inherit the consequences of our decisions, good or bad. Therefore, we must prove to the young people that despite the seriousness of the situation, the world has a plan. And where China, the UN, and the rest of the world can come together is to precisely unlock the talent and the ideas and the energies of Africa's youth, which requires similar investments today. Now, if I was a leader in an African country, what I would do is I would reach out to many Chinese universities, partner them up with our own universities in the country I'm in, and look at the points of convergence. It goes beyond language and culture. It is about the practical aspects of the economy we are talking about. How do we train more engineers, agriculture experts, irrigation experts, health workers, the entire ecosystem? I mean, I can imagine with the barefoot doctor culture that China had, that is what gave China a lot of velocity in human capital. They were able to invest at the community level in health. This is precisely what Ruth just talked about. It's an Isiolo where Huawei, the UN, government of Kenya have come together on telemedicine. Imagine if we can go to scale with an army of technically savvy community health workers. We would change this entire ecosystem very, very quickly. Like I said, what took China 40 years to achieve? Africa can do it in 10. Why? Because we have the big data, we have the technology, and we have the innovation to do it. I see great linkages over here where we could create this bedrock of skills through partnerships of academic institutions, not just on the traditional degrees, but more in the case of how to nurture and give velocity to the current economy and the future economy, which is the 4th industrial area.
So let's go back to your point, Sid. I know for a fact that Alibaba has established long-standing, robust educational programs to train e-commerce talents in Africa. Alibaba established its first EWTP programs actually with Rwanda in sub-Saharan Africa. Who are the other Chinese corporate players we're talking about that are setting up long-term agendas in training Africa's digital talents for the future?
I don't have the answer to that, but I hope that it could be many, many more. I would like to see more public-private partnerships in the academic space. The government of China, universities of China, companies like Huawei, which have had a major interaction. In fact, Shirley, let me just remind your audience here that with Huawei, we have a very special relationship that goes back.
We cannot talk about Huawei. I'm sure Alice will not let us air it. Sorry, it's because it's pre-recorded. We're fine here. So
we have quite a few tech companies in addition to Huawei, ZTE, Haifang, CloudWalk, but those have basically been providing services in terms of e-governance platforms, data centers, surveillance systems. There have been more service providers, more than sort of training. Although you could argue in the process of providing service, there's a bit of a transfer of skills. The support by what is it called? Alibaba has really unlocked a lot of people and those who are doing startups in the tech industry. And what was exciting about that is the empowerment small startups in the technology space. I think Alibaba is perhaps an exception in that it's the only one that has kind of put resources to support startups. The others, the transfer of technology is much less direct.
Yeah,
also the demand is there. The demand is there. The supply is not there. We need a supply of
Exactly.
And that can come when we see real public-private partnerships being formed, where the government provide the enabling environment for the private sector and the public sector to unite in terms of providing those.
So
also, Shirley, if I may add some information about this this training programs, there are also lots of Chinese private companies who already started to do e-commerce with the African side. They are also doing this kind of startup training. They put they build up the platform and then train African either students from our side already study in China, but also working in African countries. So I know one company called Amambo. They are doing very well. They started in Kenya, but now already expanded to 17 African countries. It's really helping with, without any resource and capital, but as an African youth, as long as you like this technology, you can just work from zero to work with this company as they're one of their brands. Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time. Right, we don't have a lot of time, but it's really interesting. So Haifang and Ruth are talking about basically lots and lots of on-the-job training by the Chinese digital companies. However, I do want to ask you a question though, Ruth. In Africa's development model going into the future, so Africa certainly will develop a vibrant agricultural economy, the primary industry. And now with China's massive digital transformation there, Africa will develop a vibrant digital economy, the service economy. But what's missing is the big part in the middle, the industrial economy, the secondary industry. In China, 1978, when China started reform and opening up, China developed a very strong industrial base and therefore the world's factory. I do not see a future strong Africa just with the strong primary industry and the strong service economy. What are you going to do to the middle?
That's a good question, Shirley, because again, COVID has been an eye-opener in more ways than one. When the supply chains were disrupted, countries had to become self-reliant. Reorganized themselves and began to provide protective equipment for COVID. And overnight, Kenya became not just in to the rest of the region, just sort of with the turn of a pin, so to speak. So I think that space needs to be expanded. Data indicates that unless we can strengthen local manufacturing as opposed to just importing. Get the jobs to the scale that is required. So a critical part of this conversation has to be how to have local manufacturing within the continent instead of simply importing materials. And the two opportunities that are immediately available and where there is a lot of demand is in agro-processing and in pharmaceuticals.
So, Shirley, if I may also add some changes from Chinese side, the governmental scholarship has a new changes, which is really encourage the manufacturing companies to work with the universities to, from the beginning, systematically training those human resources. So this is a latest, I think since 2018, when the summit announced that there's a big numbers, the ministry realized that there is a gap, as we already discussed so much between employment and the trainings. Even when you train so many people, not necessarily immediately translated into human resource. So all the trainees need to, from the beginning, understand industry, understand the companies. So this program has been helping us to solve that gap. And I also say Chinese private self-funded training academy established in Kenya. No, sorry, in Uganda, are called Sunmaker. Of course, initially they targeted the oil companies to train the local people. But by and by, they expanded to many different kind of industries. And then this company also started working in South Sudan, in Kenya, in Ethiopia. So you can say even Chinese private company can do a lot for training, so for the industry, you know, to build up the capacity.
We discussed a lot about education for the practical economic reasons for employment. However, we cannot avoid one last question, which is China's soft power. The United States has been extraordinary in terms of building its global soft power by training the future global leaders for generations. And China now is starting to emulate the same. I want to ask everybody a question. By 2050, 30 years down the road, when the next generation of leadership that are running countries in Africa, they have received a Chinese education, will that bring Africa closer to China? Will they be more affiliated with China?
The answer is absolutely yes from my side. And I think the greatest contribution any nation can make to another is in its education system. Take the example of South Korea. You know, they benefited hugely from having access to top universities, technical universities in the US, and vice versa. I see those opportunities here, but we have to keep in mind, Shirley, the scale that we need. When you're looking at in Kenya alone, you have about 1 million young people joining the workforce every year. 1 million. Now, in order to train and equip them, you can't bring everybody to China, but you can bring China to Africa. And the greatest way to bring it is by opening up opportunities, both of digital education and on-site education opportunities. This would be a remarkable contribution towards the human capital investment that we need to make. And I just want to say that you talked about agriculture. In the next 9 years, agribusiness in Africa is going to be $1 trillion worth. $1 trillion. And yet Africa is a continent that loses 50% of its food to post-harvest loss. Look at the opportunities that we have, both in the space of agriculture, and Ruth talked about pharmaceuticals. We've already done an assessment in Kenya about the potential of that in Africa. $400 billion over the next 9 years. Massive opportunities, but it is about bringing the skills, the knowledge, and the expertise to Africa. Back to you.
Yes, building on what Sid said, I think for me, a simple answer is that the countries that will have the greatest influence in Africa today are those that were able to meet Africa at its point of need, whether it is point of need in terms of job creation, whether it is point of need in terms of infrastructure, whether it is point of need in terms of health, whatever it is. So it is really a question of being constantly in tune with the emerging needs, because these are evolving needs, with the evolving needs of the continent, and to support the continent where the shoe most bites.
A friend in need is a friend indeed.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is actually becoming more clear. You know, people are becoming much more transactional as opposed to ideological, if you see what I mean.
Very interesting, but we are becoming more of a utilitarian world, in other words.
Exactly.
Shirley, if I may also conclude to answer your question, I think I don't want to predict for 30 years after what is actually China, we as US, who gain more in terms of a soft power through this youth training program. But I do know that my colleagues within the Ministry of Education and also different universities, people are doing lots of jobs. For instance, my colleague from ministry, they already, of course, each year there are evaluation system. But there are also so-called, for me, intensive evaluation, trying to improve the qualities. Now, quality becoming a key word for training African youth. So I am in the way to be very optimistic about we will have a very good, education program nowadays for Africa, and we are learning, and then still, of course, in that way, maybe we have a brighter future, at least to serve what Ruth emphasized, this kind of evolving need can be met up from Chinese side in a certain degree.
Absolutely. Fascinating conversation. China is still, given all context, is still a young economy, and the African continent is certainly the emerging economy. And so here we're talking about the two young economies, two regions are trying to learn and grow with each other. Thank you so much for everyone's time. Ms. Ruth Kagia, Deputy Chief of Staff for the President of Kenya, Siddharth Chatterjee, UN Resident Coordinator, and Professor Haifang Liu from Peking University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everyone's time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.